Welcome to our deep dive into, well, the turning points of World War II.
Ah, yes.
So you've given us like this really interesting collection of sources on some pretty pivotal battles.
Right.
We're talking Pearl Harbor,
Of course.
Midway,
Yeah.
Alamein, Stalingrad, DDay,
Big one.
Iwo Jima, and Okinawa.
Wow.
I mean, these are moments where like everything, the whole trajectory of the war was kind of hanging in the balance.
Absolutely.
But, more importantly, we're going to get into like the human stories behind them.
Yeah.
The strategies and, like what impact they had on, well, everything really.
I think what's so fascinating about these battles is they weren't just like these isolated events.
Right.
They were all part of this bigger story, this global struggle that played out across, multiple theaters of war, each with its own unique, set of challenges.
Yeah, for sure.
And turning points.
It's like a giant puzzle. And each of these battles is like a crucial piece of it.
Yeah.
So let's start piecing it together, shall we?
Sounds good.
All right. So December 7th, 1941, a date which, as you probably know, lives in infamy.
Yeah.
Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is, like the sources you've given us, they really dig into how unprepared the U.S. actually was.
Right.
Like imagine, picture it. It's a peaceful Sunday morning in Hawaii, and then, bam.
Chaos.
Total chaos.
Yeah, it was a complete surprise attack. I mean, the Japanese, they wanted to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Right. So they launched wave after wave of bombers and fighter planes. And the sources describe like ships lined up in a row, almost like sitting ducks.
Oh, wow.
Their anti-aircraft guns were caught totally off guard.
Yeah.
And the airfields were hit hard, too.
Right.
I mean, planes were parked like wingtip to wingtip, making them so easy to target.
It's hard to comprehend the scale of the losses.
It really is.
Over 2,400 Americans killed.
Yeah.
Battleships sunk. The Pacific Fleet, just decimated.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Pure luck. Pure luck had 2 U.S. aircraft carriers out at sea.
During the attack. Wow.
Had they been in port, the entire course of the war in the Pacific could have been totally different.
Wow.
Like, think about that.
It's crazy.
Those carriers being out at sea purely by chance might have changed, everything.
It's a pretty chilling thought, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. Now, the attack on Pearl Harbor, obviously it was a tragedy.
Yes, of course.
But it also had this unintended consequence.
Oh.
It galvanized American public opinion.
Right. Because before Pearl Harbor, the U.S. was hesitant to get involved in the war in Europe, right?
Yeah.
But this attack, this act of aggression, changed everything.
Yeah, it's like someone flipped a switch. Right? Suddenly there's this overwhelming sense of unity and purpose.
Right.
Like isolationism out.
Gone.
This like fierce determination to fight back in.
Yeah.
And this shift in public opinion, it was fueled by the raw emotion of Pearl Harbor.
Right.
It gave President Roosevelt the political capital he needed to formally declare war.
Exactly.
And that declaration of war, propelled by the public outrage, it marked America's entry into World War II.
Yeah.
And that was a pivotal moment.
Absolutely.
Not just for the U.S., but for the entire Allied cause.
Huge.
Okay, so Pearl Harbor throws the U.S. into the war.
Right.
Now let's fast forward.
Okay.
6 months to June 1942.
All right.
Another pivotal battle, the Battle of Midway.
Okay.
This time, though, the U.S. wasn't caught off guard.
Oh, no.
In fact, they were ready to, turn the tables on the Japanese.
I see. Okay. Well, Midway was this fascinating battle of wits and strategy. Remember the Doolittle raid a few months earlier?
Yeah.
The one where American bombers launched a daring, albeit symbolic, attack on Tokyo.
Yeah, that raid, while it didn't cause much actual damage, it really got under the Japanese skin.
Oh, it did. It was a humiliation for them.
Yeah.
And it pushed Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, to devise a plan to lure the U.S. Navy into a trap at Midway.
I see.
Midway Island was the last American base in the North Pacific, strategically vital.
So it's a classic case of come and get us.
Right.
Except the U.S. knew the Japanese were coming.
They did.
Thanks to their code breakers.
Ah, the code breakers.
This is where it gets super interesting.
Okay.
The U.S. had cracked the Japanese naval code.
No way.
And they knew Yamamoto's plan.
Wow.
Like down to the last detail.
Really?
Imagine having that kind of intel advantage.
Oh, man.
It was a game changer. Admiral Nimitz,
Right.
the U.S. commander in the Pacific, was able to position his carriers, the Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, in the perfect spot to ambush the Japanese fleet.
Wow.
An ambush they did.
I bet.
The U.S. Navy sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers.
Wow.
And destroyed over 250 planes.
That's incredible.
It was a decisive victory.
Yeah.
That marked a turning point in the Pacific War.
For sure.
The Japanese, who had been on the offensive up to this point, were suddenly on the defensive.
I see.
And what's important to note is that the Japanese, they never really recovered from those losses at Midway.
Really?
Their ability to, wage an offensive war was severely hampered.
Wow.
Giving the U.S. the initiative in the Pacific.
It's like a boxing match, right?
Yeah.
Japan threw their best punch at Pearl Harbor.
Yep.
But the U.S. absorbed it and then came back with a knockout counterpunch at Midway.
A great analogy.
Now, while these epic clashes were unfolding in the Pacific, another crucial front was opening up thousands of miles away.
Okay.
In the deserts of North Africa.
Ah, yes. North Africa, the setting for some of the most intense desert warfare the world had ever seen. And at the heart of it all was Erwin Rommel.
Ah, the Desert Fox.
The legendary Desert Fox.
Legendary.
So, he was a brilliant tactician leading the German Africa Corps in a series of lightning-fast advances that pushed the British forces back to the brink of disaster.
Wow. His blitzkrieg tactics, using tanks and air power in these swift, coordinated attacks, they were so effective in that open desert terrain. The British were reeling, just desperately trying to hold on to Egypt and the Suez Canal, which was vital.
And this brings us to El Alamein.
Okay.
A battle that would prove to be a crucial turning point. Not just for the North African campaign, but for British morale as well.
Morale, yeah.
This was October 1942, and the British had been on the back foot for months.
Yeah.
They desperately needed a win.
I bet.
And Winston Churchill,
the
British Prime Minister, he knew it. He had gambled on holding North Africa, believing that it was crucial to gain, experience fighting on the periphery of the Nazi Empire before attempting a full-scale invasion of Europe.
I see.
It was a risky strategy.
It was.
And it looked like it might backfire.
Yeah.
Rommel had pushed the British all the way back to El Alamein.
Wow.
Just 70 miles from Alexandria. If he broke through here, the Suez Canal would be his.
Right.
And the consequences for the British war effort.
Yeah.
Dire.
Very dire.
The Suez Canal, it was a lifeline.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Control of the canal meant control of the shortest sea route between Europe and Asia.
Yeah.
Vital for troop movements, supplies.
Yeah.
It was like this giant artery that the British couldn't afford to have severed.
No.
So the stakes at El Alamein, incredibly high.
Oh, yeah.
But luckily for the British, they had a new commander on the scene.
Oh, who was that?
General Bernard Montgomery.
Okay.
Meticulous planner known for his methodical approach to warfare.
Okay.
Montgomery was the opposite of Rommel in many ways, right?
Really?
Rommel was all about speed and maneuver, while Montgomery was more deliberate.
I see.
More cautious.
Yeah.
But ultimately very effective.
So different style.
Yeah, very different styles.
Okay.
And at El Alamein, Montgomery's approach proved to be the winning formula.
Interesting.
He meticulously planned his attack, built up his forces, and waited for the right moment to strike.
And when he did strike?
Oh, when he did strike.
Yeah.
It was with overwhelming force.
Wow.
The British launched a massive artillery bombardment.
Right.
Followed by a, coordinated infantry and tank assault.
Wow.
The fighting was brutal.
Yeah.
Back and forth. But in the end, the British prevailed.
They did.
Rommel was forced to retreat, his dreams of conquering Egypt shattered.
Wow.
Alamein was a huge morale boost for the British.
Absolutely.
I remember Churchill's famous line.
Oh, remind me.
Before Alamein, we never had a victory.
Yeah.
After Alamein, we never had a defeat.
Wow.
It really captured the significance of that battle.
Powerful.
It was a turning point that put the British back on the offensive in North Africa.
Right.
And marked the beginning of the end for Rommel's Africa Corps.
Wow. It's incredible to think how this battle fought in the scorching deserts of North Africa had such a ripple effect across the entire war.
Yeah.
And speaking of ripple effects, let's shift our attention now to the Eastern Front, where one of the most brutal and decisive battles of World War II was about to unfold. Stalingrad.
I mean, that name just evokes images of, like, unimaginable carnage.
Absolutely.
And suffering.
Yeah.
It was a battle that pushed both sides to the limits of human endurance.
It really did.
A clash of ideologies as much as armies.
Yeah.
From what I've read in the sources you've given us, Stalingrad was a meat grinder.
Yeah.
Like a city reduced to rubble. Where soldiers fought like hand-to-hand in the streets.
Yeah.
Amidst the ruins of buildings.
Right.
Sometimes for days, like over a single block. It's the scale of it all.
I know.
It's mind-boggling.
It's hard to overstate the ferocity of the fighting at Stalingrad.
Yeah.
I mean, Hitler was obsessed with capturing the city.
Right.
Both for its industrial importance and for its symbolic value.
Of course, it bore Stalin's name.
Exactly.
Stalin, on the other hand, he was equally determined to hold the city at all costs.
Yeah.
He issued his famous order, not a step back.
Wow.
Which essentially condemned his soldiers to fight to the death.
It sounds like both sides were locked in this like deadly embrace.
Yeah.
Neither willing to yield.
No. But, I mean, what were the conditions like for the soldiers on the ground?
Oh, man.
I mean, we're talking about Russia in the winter.
Yeah.
Which is brutal enough on its own.
Right.
But then you add in, like, constant bombardment, street fighting, lack of food and supplies.
Yeah.
I mean, it must have been hell on earth.
The sources you provided paint a very vivid picture of the horrors faced by both sides. I mean, the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, they relentlessly bombed the city, reducing it to a smoldering wasteland. The Soviets dug in amidst the ruins. They endured constant artillery barrages, sniper fire, hand-to-hand combat, and then there was the winter.
The winter.
The bitter Russian winter. Set in, bringing with it sub-zero temperatures, blizzards, and frostbite.
It's hard to imagine, like, fighting under those conditions.
It is.
Let alone surviving.
Yeah.
But somehow they did.
I know.
The Soviets, fueled by this fierce determination to defend their homeland, they clung to the city, block by bloody block.
Wow.
Their resilience, it was remarkable.
They were outgunned, outmaneuvered in the early stages of the battle, but they never gave up.
No.
They used their knowledge of the city to their advantage.
Right.
They turned every ruined building into a defensive position.
Wow.
Every sewer tunnel into a supply route. They
were fighting not just for their lives, but for the very survival of their nation.
Yeah.
And you can sense that desperation. That unyielding spirit, in some of the accounts from the sources.
It's really powerful stuff,
and ultimately decisive.
Yeah.
The tide began to turn in November 1942.
Okay.
When the Soviets launched a massive counteroffensive.
Okay.
Codenamed Operation Uranus.
Operation Uranus. I mean, that's a name that sounds more fitting for a science fiction novel than a military operation.
I know.
What was the strategy behind it?
So the Soviets, they realized that the Germans had overextended their flanks.
Okay.
So they launched this pincer movement, trapping the German 6th Army within the city.
Wow.
It was a brilliant maneuver that caught the Germans completely by surprise.
So the hunters became the hunted.
Exactly.
The Germans, who had been on the offensive, were now encircled, cut off from their supply lines, and facing a brutal Russian winter with, like, dwindling resources.
Exactly.
It was a slow, agonizing defeat for the Germans.
It was.
Trapped and starving.
Yeah.
They fought on for weeks.
Clinging to this hope of a rescue operation that never came.
Gosh. I mean, what must that have been like?
Yeah.
To be trapped in that frozen hellhole, knowing that relief wasn't coming.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine the despair they must have felt.
I know. The sources you've provided describe, like, Scenes of incredible suffering.
Yes.
Soldiers freezing to death in their trenches.
Right.
Resorting to eating, like, horses.
Yes.
And even rats to survive.
Wow.
The human cost was staggering.
It was.
And in the end, the Germans were forced to surrender.
Yes.
What a devastating blow.
Oh, yeah.
For the Nazi war machine.
It was a turning point of monumental proportions.
Yeah.
The Battle of Stalingrad marked the beginning of the end for the Axis powers on the Eastern Front.
Right.
It shattered the myth of German invincibility and inflicted losses that they simply couldn't replace.
So what about the impact on the Soviet Union?
Yeah.
They had endured, like, unimaginable losses.
They had.
But they'd also proven their resilience.
Right.
Their ability to withstand, like, the full might of the German war machine.
I mean, Stalingrad was a turning point for the Soviets, too. It bolstered their morale.
Yeah.
It galvanized their war effort, and it solidified their position as a major player on the world stage.
Yeah.
But this victory came at a terrible cost.
Right.
I mean, the city was in ruins.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers and civilians dead.
Yeah.
And the scars of that battle would linger for generations.
It's hard to, like, grasp the scale of the sacrifice.
I know.
The sheer grit it took to endure that kind of suffering and emerge victorious from the frozen hellscape of Stalingrad.
Right.
We now jump across the continent.
Okay.
To June 6th, 1944.
All right.
And one of the most iconic military operations in history.
D-Day.
D-Day.
The Allied invasion of Normandy.
D-Day was the culmination of years of planning, a massive undertaking that involved hundreds of thousands of troops, thousands of ships.
Wow.
And an air armada unlike anything the world had ever seen.
It was the long-awaited Second Front.
Yeah.
That Stalin had been demanding.
Right.
A direct assault on Nazi-occupied Europe that would finally relieve some of the pressure on the Eastern Front.
It's fascinating to see how this operation came together.
I know.
You know, the logistical challenges, the strategic calculations, and the elaborate deception plan.
Right.
That was put in place to mislead the Germans.
I mean, the Allies went to extraordinary lengths to convince the Germans that the invasion would come at Calais.
Okay.
The narrowest point between England and France, I mean, they created fake armies.
Really?
Phantom radio transmissions.
Wow.
They even planted false intelligence.
Wow.
To throw the Germans off the scent.
It's like something out of a spy thriller.
It is.
And it worked, right?
It did.
Hitler was completely convinced that Calais was the target.
Yeah.
Leaving Normandy relatively lightly defended.
Exactly.
And so in the early hours of June 6th, under the cover of darkness, the Allied invasion force set sail.
Wow.
Across the English Channel.
I mean, it was a vast armada stretching for miles, carrying with it the hopes and fears of an entire continent.
I've seen those images.
Oh, yeah.
Of the landing craft.
Yeah.
Approaching the beaches. The soldiers huddled together.
Yeah.
Their faces grim.
Right.
Knowing that they were, like, heading into the unknown.
Yeah.
It must have been terrifying.
It was a moment of immense tension and uncertainty. I mean, the soldiers, they had trained for months.
Yeah.
But they knew that the real test was about to begin.
And then as dawn broke,
the
beaches of Normandy, codenamed Utah,
right,
Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword,
right.
They came under a, like, withering barrage of Allied firepower.
Wow.
I mean, the air was thick with smoke.
Yeah.
The sound of explosions as warships and bombers pounded German defenses.
It must have been incredible.
And then the first wave of landing craft hit the beaches.
Wow.
And it was chaos.
I bet.
Like a maelstrom of bullets, explosions, and desperate men fighting for their lives.
Yeah.
The Germans, though, caught off guard.
Yeah.
They fought back fiercely,
right,
raking the beaches with machine gun fire and artillery.
The sources you've shared describe the landing at Omaha Beach as particularly horrific.
Oh, yeah.
The Americans, they faced intense resistance.
Right.
And casualties were heavy. It's a testament to their courage and determination that they were able to overcome those initial setbacks and secure a foothold on the beach.
Omaha Beach was a a crucible,
yeah,
a test of fire for the American soldiers.
Yeah.
But they persevered.
They did.
And by the end of the day, the Allies had established a beachhead on the coast of France.
Wow.
D-Day was a monumental achievement.
Absolutely.
A turning point that marked the beginning of the liberation of Europe.
Right.
But the fighting was far from over.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the Allies still had a long and bloody road ahead of them before they could claim final victory.
Absolutely. And while the focus was now shifting to the liberation of Europe,
right,
the war in the Pacific was far from over.
Right.
The Allies were engaged in a grueling island hopping campaign.
Yeah.
Inching their way closer to the Japanese mainland.
And that brings us to our next stop on this deep dive.
Okay.
A tiny volcanic island.
Right.
That would become the stage for one of the most iconic and bloody battles of the Pacific War.
Iwo Jima.
Iwo Jima.
The Iwo Jima was just a speck on the map.
Yeah.
A volcanic island barely 8 square miles in size.
Wow.
But its strategic importance was immense.
Yeah.
It was within striking distance of Japan. The perfect location for an airbase that could support the bombing campaign against the Japanese mainland.
So this tiny island becomes a critical stepping stone for the Allies.
Right.
But capturing it would prove to be no easy feat.
No. The Japanese knew the strategic value of Iwo Jima.
Yeah.
And they had fortified the island extensively. They had dug this intricate network of tunnels and bunkers, concealed artillery positions, and were prepared to fight to the death to defend it.
The sources describe the terrain of Iwo Jima as almost otherworldly.
It was.
Volcanic ash, sulfurous fumes.
Right.
And a landscape like pockmarked with craters and caves.
Yeah.
It sounds like a scene from a science fiction film.
It was a desolate and unforgiving landscape. The volcanic ash made it difficult to move.
Right.
The air was thick with the stench of sulfur, host. And the Japanese defenders were hidden everywhere, just waiting to ambush the Americans.
It sounds like a nightmare scenario for the Marines who landed there on February 19th, 1945.
It was. The Marines faced just a relentless barrage of artillery and machine gun fire as they stormed the beaches.
Yeah.
The Japanese, dug in deep within their fortified positions, were determined to make the Americans pay dearly for every inch of ground.
I've seen the famous photograph.
Oh, yeah.
Of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi.
Right.
You know, the iconic image of 6 Marines raising the American flag atop the island's highest point.
Yeah.
It captures the heroism and sacrifice of those who fought at Iwo Jima.
Absolutely.
But what's often overlooked is the terrible cost of that victory.
It was.
The fighting on Iwo Jima was just brutal.
Brutal.
And unrelenting.
Yeah.
The Marines fought their way, like inch by inch.
Wow.
Through a hail of bullets and explosions, up steep slopes, and across open terrain.
The casualties were heavy on both sides.
Over 6,000 Marines were killed.
Wow.
Another 18,000 wounded.
Gosh.
The Japanese, true to their word, fought almost to the last man.
Yeah.
With only 1,000 surrendering.
It was a Pyrrhic victory for the Americans, a testament to the ferocity of the fighting in the Pacific, and a grim foreshadowing of what was to come.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
And it leads us to our final stop on this deep dive.
Okay.
Another island, even closer to the Japanese mainland, Okinawa.
Okinawa was the last major battle of World War II.
Yeah.
A bloody and brutal struggle that would have profound implications for the final outcome of the war.
Just 350 miles from mainland Japan, Okinawa was seen as the final stepping stone for the planned invasion of Japan.
Right.
But the battle for Okinawa will prove to be even more costly and devastating than Iwo Jima.
Oh, yeah. The Japanese, they had learned from their experiences at Iwo Jima and had dug in even deeper on Okinawa. They had constructed elaborate tunnel systems.
Wow.
Fortified caves. And were prepared to launch desperate counterattacks.
Right.
Including the use of kamikaze pilots who deliberately crashed their planes into American ships.
Kamikaze attacks.
Yeah.
That's something I find both terrifying and fascinating.
It is.
What drove those pilots to sacrifice their lives in such a way?
Well, it was a combination of factors.
Okay.
A deep sense of patriotism.
Yeah.
A belief in the emperor's divinity.
Right.
And a culture that placed a high value on self-sacrifice for the greater good. It was a tactic born of desperation.
Yeah.
A last-ditch effort to inflict as much damage as possible on the enemy.
And it was terrifyingly effective.
It was.
Those kamikaze attacks, they caused significant damage to American ships.
Right.
And instilled fear in the hearts of sailors who had never faced such a relentless and suicidal enemy.
The fighting on Okinawa was fierce.
And protracted. A brutal struggle for every inch of ground.
Yeah.
The Japanese defenders, they fought with incredible tenacity.
Yeah.
Launching suicidal counterattacks.
Yeah.
Emerging from their tunnels and caves.
Right.
To engage in hand-to-hand combat.
Wow.
Even using civilians as human shields.
It sounds like the fighting was incredibly chaotic.
It was.
And brutal.
Yeah.
A real test of endurance.
Yeah.
For the American soldiers.
The battle raged for 82 days.
Wow.
From April 1st to June 22nd, 1945.
Wow.
By the time it was over 12,500 American soldiers had been killed and tens of thousands more wounded.
And the Japanese losses were even higher, right?
Yes, over 110,000 Japanese soldiers were killed.
Wow.
And countless civilians perished in the fighting.
Yeah.
The island of Okinawa was devastated.
Yeah.
Its landscape scarred by bombs and artillery fire.
Right.
Its people traumatized by the violence they had witnessed. Okinawa was a victory for the Allies.
It was.
But a Pyrrhic one.
It was a very costly victory.
The human cost was staggering.
It was.
And the brutality of the fighting raised serious questions about the feasibility of invading the Japanese mainland.
The battle for Okinawa had a profound impact on the thinking of American military leaders.
I bet.
They saw firsthand the fanaticism of the Japanese defenders and realized that an invasion of Japan would be a long and bloody affair with potentially millions of casualties on both sides.
So this is where the story takes a truly dramatic turn.
It does.
While the fighting raged on Okinawa, a new and terrifying weapon was being developed in the deserts of New Mexico. A weapon that would change the course of history and cast a long shadow over the post-war world.
The atomic bomb?
The atomic bomb.
A weapon of unimaginable destructive power that would soon be unleashed on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Ushering in the nuclear age. And forcing the world to confront a new and terrifying reality.
It's a chilling thought, knowing that as the battle for Okinawa raged, this other, even more consequential development was unfolding behind the scenes. It really highlights the complexity and the multiple layers of history that we're uncovering in this deep dive.
Exactly. And it sets the stage for our next segment, where we'll delve into the decision to use the atomic bomb, the consequences of that fateful choice, and the enduring legacy of World War II.
This has been an incredible journey so far, exploring these pivotal battles.
It is.
And witnessing the human drama that unfolded on the battlefields of World War II.
Absolutely.
But this is just the beginning. There's so much more to discover, more stories to uncover, and more lessons to learn.
And that's what makes history so fascinating. It's not just a collection of dates and names. It's a tapestry of human experiences, triumphs, and tragedies that continue to shape our world today.
I couldn't agree more. So stay tuned for part 3 of our deep dive, where we'll explore the end of the war, the atomic bombings, and the long-lasting consequences of this global conflict.
You know, it's fascinating to see how these individual battles, these turning points, they weren't just about military tactics and technology. They were also deeply influenced by cultural and ideological factors.
That's a great point. It's like each nation, brought its own set of values and beliefs to the battlefield.
Exactly.
And that really shaped the way the war was fought.
Absolutely.
For example, the sources you shared on the Japanese mindset during the war, incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
They highlight the importance of honor and sacrifice in Japanese culture at that time.
Yes. For the Japanese, surrender was often seen as unthinkable, a fate worse than death.
Yeah.
This belief, rooted in their samurai traditions and reinforced by wartime propaganda. It fueled their willingness to fight to the very last man, even when the odds were overwhelmingly against them.
It's hard to grasp that level of dedication, that willingness to sacrifice like everything for a cause.
Incredible.
Makes those brutal last stands on islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa even more tragic.
Yeah.
Knowing that many of those Japanese soldiers thought they had no other choice but to fight to the death.
It's a tragic aspect of war, how it can, push individuals to such extremes. And it wasn't just the Japanese. I mean, the Allied soldiers also faced unimaginable horrors.
Of course.
And hardships, driven by their own set of beliefs and motivations.
Absolutely. The sources you've shared about the Allied perspective are equally compelling.
Yeah.
There was this growing awareness of the atrocities being committed by the Axis powers, the horrors of the Holocaust.
Of course.
The brutal treatment of civilians in occupied territories.
Yeah.
And this fueled a sense of moral outrage. Mm-hmm. A determination to defeat fascism at all costs.
It became more than just a war for territory or resources.
Right.
It was a war for the very soul of humanity.
Yeah.
A fight against tyranny and oppression.
Right.
And that sense of purpose, that belief in the righteousness of their cause, it helped sustain the Allied soldiers through some of the darkest moments of the war.
It's almost like these clashing ideologies.
Right.
These fundamentally different worldviews, they collided on the battlefields of World War II.
They did.
Creating this incredibly intense and complex conflict.
Exactly. And it wasn't just a clash between nations. It was a clash of values, of beliefs, of ways of life.
Yeah.
And that's what makes World War II such a compelling and enduring subject of study.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront the human capacity for both, great good and great evil.
Right.
And to grapple with the complexities of war and its lasting impact on the world.
You've mentioned the impact on the world, and that's something I wanted to explore further. Okay. We've talked about the battles, the turning points, the ideologies.
Right.
But what about the everyday people?
Yeah.
Caught in the crossfire.
Yeah.
How did World War II affect their lives?
The war's impact on civilians was devastating. I mean, millions were killed, wounded, or displaced from their homes.
Right.
Cities were bombed into rubble.
Yeah.
Economies were shattered.
Yeah.
And entire populations were subjected to occupation, oppression, and systematic violence.
The sources you've shared about the firebombing of Japanese cities, particularly harrowing.
Oh, yeah.
The sheer scale of the destruction.
Oh, I know.
The loss of life. It's almost unimaginable.
The firebombing of Tokyo in March 1945,
right,
for example, was one of the most destructive air raids in history.
Yeah.
Incendiary bombs created a firestorm that swept through the city, killing an estimated 100,000 people.
Wow.
And leaving over 1 million homeless.
It's a stark reminder that even in conventional warfare, the human cost can be immense, especially for civilians.
Absolutely.
Caught in the crossfire.
And then, of course, there's the Holocaust, the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime.
Right.
It's a chapter of history that we must never forget.
No.
A testament to the depths of human cruelty.
Yeah.
And the dangers of unchecked hatred and intolerance.
It's a sobering thought, a dark stain on human history.
It is.
But it's important to remember that amidst the darkness, there were also stories of resilience.
Of course.
Of courage, of individuals and communities coming together to help each other survive.
Absolutely. The sources you've shared highlight the incredible acts of bravery and compassion that emerged during the war.
Right.
Individuals risking their lives to save others.
Yeah.
Communities sharing their meager resources.
Yeah.
Acts of kindness and solidarity that offered glimmers of hope in the face of unimaginable suffering.
It's inspiring to see how even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure.
Right.
And how acts of kindness and courage can make a difference. And I think that's an important message to take away from this deep dive.
I agree. It's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, there is always hope.
There is.
There's always the potential for good to triumph over evil, for compassion to overcome hatred, for people to come together and rebuild their lives and their communities.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the turning points of World War II, what are some of the key takeaways, the lasting lessons that we can apply to our own lives and to the challenges we face today?
I think one of the most important lessons is the importance of understanding history.
Yeah.
Of learning from the mistakes of the past.
Right.
And of recognizing the patterns that can lead to conflict and violence.
History isn't just about, dates and battles.
Right.
It's about understanding the complexities of human behavior.
Right.
The motivations and ideologies that drive individuals and nations to act the way they do.
Exactly. By studying history, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, of our societies,
right,
and of the challenges we face in the world today.
Yeah.
We can learn to recognize the warning signs of conflict, to appreciate the fragility of peace, and to work towards building a more just and equitable world.
Another key takeaway, I think, is the importance of individual action and responsibility.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen how even in the midst of a global conflict,
right,
individuals had the power to make a difference.
They did.
To stand up for what they believed in.
Yeah.
And to fight for a better future.
Those acts of courage and compassion, those moments of human connection amidst the chaos, they remind us that we all have a role to play.
We do.
In shaping the world around us.
Yeah, whether it's speaking out against injustice, helping those in need, or simply being kind and compassionate towards others.
Absolutely.
We can all make a difference.
You can. And finally, I think it's important to remember that history is not a static thing.
Right.
It's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
A dialogue between the past, the present, and the future.
It's up to us to continue that conversation.
It is.
To engage with history.
Yeah.
To ask questions.
Right.
To challenge assumptions.
Absolutely.
And to use what we learn to build a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.
So as you continue to explore the history of World War II, I encourage you to keep these lessons in mind. Remember the sacrifices made, the lessons learned, and the enduring impact of this global conflict. And most importantly, use this knowledge to inspire action, to promote peace and to create a world where the horrors of World War II are never repeated.
It's been an incredible journey.
It has.
This deep dive into the turning points of World War II.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing your sources.
Of course.
And for allowing us to guide you through this complex, fascinating chapter history.
We hope you found it insightful.
Yeah.
Thought-provoking, and perhaps even inspiring.
And until next time, keep asking questions.
Yes.
Keep learning.
Right.
And keep diving deep.